I get it. Like, I understand why a lot of Bears fans seem to be finding themselves very excited in this offseason. I don't know that it's so much tied directly into just what they expect from the team in 2021, but maybe more of a representation of a projection of future possibilities. The Mitchell Trubisky era is officially done in Chicago. Now comes the Justin Fields era, and you're excited about it. You're thinking, hey, this is a second chance for Ryan Pace. You're thinking this is a second chance for the team to get it right at the quarterback position under this regime, and they're going to do it, by God. And if this team gets that quarterback and Fields is that dude, which a lot of you feel that he is going to be, then the whole trajectory of the organization changes exponentially. And at that point in time, you feel like, hey, the biggest knock on Ryan Pace is now gone. It's out the door. And you're starting to, I think, put the cart a little bit before the horse here in terms of being relatively defensive of Ryan Pace and his tenure and his regime, and somewhat effusive in your praise for him. And I just feel like we should be pumping the brakes a little bit on that, at least for now. For now. We'll see what the future holds. But the reality is, based off of the past 6 seasons, I know a lot of you are going to point to one thing and say that's the only thing, but you're really missing the plot here. Because if you take a look at the body of work of Ryan Pace over the first 6 seasons of his tenure as general manager of the Chicago Bears, I promise you, it's not as impressive as you want to make it. Now, what a number of people I've seen talk about on Twitter over the past couple of months is Ryan Pace being a generally good drafter and doing a good job, particularly in the mid rounds and the later rounds. And look, when you look at it in a bubble, he and his scouting department, his front office, have a pretty good hit rate on some of the round 4 and later guys. There's no question about it. In terms of that, you could say you could hold them up against just about anybody in the league over the past 6 years. And that's not a crazy thing to say. That is a fair and true statement. And they do deserve, as a scouting department, as a front office, Pace, the general manager, who ultimately makes the decision, they deserve credit and recognition for their performance of some of the guys they've been able to find rounds 3 through 7. You're talking about the Eddie Jacksons of the world and the Tariq Cohens of the world and so on and so forth. Like, there's a number of notable hits. They're looking at last year's 5th round pick, one of them at least, and Darnell Mooney. Like everybody's expecting in year 2, he's going to make this big leap forward, and it certainly seems like he is poised to do so. David Montgomery had a great year last year. He was a former 3rd round pick. Like, you see plenty of examples of this scouting group, this front office, this general manager, knowing what they're doing later on in the draft. I completely and totally agree with that. And some of you are going to point to his 1st round history and say that it's all not that bad. But this is where we start to lose the plot a little bit, because you'll start saying, well, the only real knock you can have against him is Kevin White, which was unforeseen, and Mitchell Trubisky, because he took him over Mahomes and Watson. But again, you're not telling the full story. Kevin White, yeah, I was obviously on board with it at the time. Ryan Pace and I share just how wrong we were about that. The next year, they take Leonard Floyd. If you remember, they moved up from 11 to 9, which is part of a recurring theme and trend for Ryan Pace, and this front office is panicking and giving up additional picks to move up a couple slots to ensure they get their guy instead of allowing the draft board to fall as it may. At some point in time, those chickens come home to roost in terms of reduced draft capital, especially for a team that's shown with some of their later round drafting that they know what they're doing in that spot. The Leonard Floyd pick I was a fan of at the time. Many Bears fans were not. And the reality is he finally had a breakout season in 2020, but unfortunately it was for the Rams. And as much as you might want to spin that as Ryan Pace and the Bears drafted the right guy ultimately, the reality is they didn't get it out of him in Chicago. So it was a disappointment to bust pick. Well, he played the run well. You don't take an edge rusher in the damn top 10 to play the run well. Excuse me. That's clown school stuff. Maybe in the top 10 around 3 or 4, that's one thing. top 10 of a draft where you had to jump from 11 to 9 and give up an additional pick to do so? No, that's stupid. And then the whole thing of, well, he just missed on Trubisky. He didn't just miss on Trubisky by a little bit. He missed on him a ton. He missed on 2 other Pro Bowl elite level quarterbacks that were available in the same draft. He traded up from 3 to 2, gave up multiple additional picks to do so because he fucking panicked. Picks that we've talked about before and other people talked about were turned into guys like Fred Warner and Alvin Kamara. Like, imagine how nice they would look in Chicago Bears uniforms. Like, if they would have just stayed put at 3 and taken Trubisky, the whole thought would be at least a little bit different. And saying, well, he just missed on Trubisky. He didn't just miss on him. He missed on him by a mile. And some of you Bears fans that still can't let it go, Mitch was terrible. He sucked. It's time to move the hell on and acknowledge and accept that. It doesn't make you a bad Bears fan. You're not the idiot that traded up from 3 to 2 to get him in 2017 to begin with. And he didn't just miss a little bit at quarterback. He missed massively at quarterback, which is the most important position in North American professional football by a mile. And then, after drafting, mind you, Mitchell Trubisky in 2017, he basically invested his next 3 first-round picks on the defensive side of the ball by taking Roquan at 8 in 2018 and then trading the next 2 years' first-round picks for Khalil Mack. Now, in a bubble, you sit there and say, shit, Roquan is certainly worth the top 10 pick. Agreed. Khalil Mack, hard to not justify giving up 2 first-round picks to get an elite-level talent like Khalil Mack. Some would agree. But when you look at the grander scheme of things, when you talk about Ryan Pace and building a team in a league that's trending much more offensive, he went in the exact opposite direction and it blew up in his fucking face. It didn't do any damn good to build up this great elite level defense to create your window of opportunity to win a championship when your offense was mediocre to suck. You didn't do nearly enough to help out the young quarterback who had proved very early to me that he didn't have it, but you didn't do much to help him. Like, that's not a small thing. So again, when you look at it in a window, like in its own kind of bubble, without the full picture and the full context, you say, hey, you traded 2 first-round picks for Khalil Mack, but then you got Roquan Smith. Like, yeah, you built up the defense, but what did that mean? In 6 years, Ryan Pace has won 0 playoff games as a general manager. His team has been to the playoffs twice. 2018, part of the reason they didn't go further in the playoffs is because of Ryan Pace's decision at the kicking position. He got it wrong at kicker, and it cost the team mightily. Double doink. So you have to forgive me here to not be shouting from the rooftops about how great and awesome Ryan Pace is, because the reality is, whether you want to admit it or not, after 6 years, he's not even sniffing Ayatollah Angelo. In year 6, Jerry Angelo built a team that went to the Super Bowl with Rex Grossman as a fucking starting quarterback. He's clearly better than Ryan Pace through 6 years, and you're a clown if you think otherwise. So now you're sitting there and you're trying to say he's done a good job of drafting, he's done a good job of this, but when you look at the larger scheme, you say, I don't know about all that. Like, yeah, there's certainly been some good, notable mid-late round selections, but still building on the wrong side of the ball. Meanwhile, on offense, you look at it and you say, okay, where have they heavily invested? Allen Robinson, sure. But, they've created some unnecessary angst there with Allen Robinson by franchise tagging him instead of giving him a long-term deal. When you look at the quarterback position, this is Ryan Pace, the same guy who basically cut Kyle Fuller so they could support signing Andy Dalton. He put this team over the salary cap with a Mitchell Trubisky at quarterback, screwed up their window of opportunity to win because he got the quarterback position wrong and didn't do enough to build up the offense as a whole. Meanwhile, traded away a Pro Bowl level caliber cornerback at the peak of his career to bring in the Red Rocket, who's a mediocre ass bum at this stage of his career. Like, that is not worth praising. You're going to say, well, you couldn't just roll with Foles. It also suggests maybe that they didn't think they were going to go for Justin Fields or hadn't made the decision that they were going to trade up to get Justin Fields or have a chance at Justin Fields or potentially even draft a quarterback in the first round of this year's draft. It almost feels like the pressure of the time got to them and they finally made the decision. Because if he did, there's no way you're making that deal to bring in Andy Dalton, even if it is for 1 year. That's stupid for a team that's already up against the salary cap. Why the hell would you do that? Huh? Again, that makes absolutely no sense. So 2 playoff appearances, including a backdoored playoff appearance this past year, 2 playoff game losses. And when you're talking about Justin Fields, like I think a lot of you are ascribing that to, you really are a fan of Justin Fields and you really like him. I sure hope to God he's a Deshaun Watson, Russell Wilson type of talent. And I think from a physical standpoint, he certainly can be. But there are definitely flaws in his game that make me say we need to pause a minute before we just automatically break out the anointing oil. You also got to look at the fact of he was the 4th quarterback taken in that draft. That says something. What that says remains to be seen. And I want to be clear because sometimes some of you, it feels like, have a listening problem. It either says that he was available at 11 because other teams are right and he's not that dude. Or it says that you got a bunch of idiots running these teams that were picking in the top 10 that allowed a guy like Justin Fields to drop out of the top 10. And either one of those can be true, and only time will tell which one is. Because if Justin Fields becomes, let's say, even a top 10 quarterback in the league, most of those teams that were picking in the top 10 in this year's draft that passed on him, those general managers, those head coaches need to be fired and held accountable for that. Because that's inexcusable. But if he's not that dude, then you understand why these other teams passed on him, and the Bears yet again sacrifice future draft pick capital for the wrong fucking quarterback. It's just a symptom to me of the mediocrity of the McCaskey way of being Counting Ted and yuck, goofy George McCaskey, that you guys are excited about a general manager so damn much and going so out of your way to defend somebody that hasn't won a playoff game in 6 years. That's the result that matters to us as fans, or should at the end of the fucking day. And the results just aren't there. And what I find fascinating is all these people are sitting there making these great praising statements about Ryan Pace, forgetting the fact that at the same time, the head coach that a lot of those same fans like to knock and criticize, and for valid reasons, Matt Nagy, was freaking hired by Ryan Pace! Make it make sense, people! How are you praising this general manager who hired the coach that you don't like, the coach that you don't have confidence in can be the guy to help develop Justin Fields into the quarterback that the Chicago Bears so badly, desperately need? It just doesn't make any sense. The Bears have none of their first-round picks left from the first 3 drafts of the Ryan Pace era. Their next 3 first-round picks were all invested on the defensive side of the ball between Roquan Smith and Khalil Mack. And that defense is not elite, and you need to stop pretending like it is. Until proven otherwise, it's not. We saw what they were in 2020, and they're not elite. And then this year, they took a quarterback after giving Andy Dalton too much money that they didn't need to get him. Like, just the whole thing, like, I don't get it. And even then, if you're going with Justin Fields, then you really, truly need to go all in. And they still failed to do that. If you think the Chicago Bears truly have enough weapons on offense and they're truly good on offense, you're being delusional. Again, accepting mediocrity. So they haven't truly gone all in on offense. They haven't built that offensive unit up around Justin Fields to be elite. You've got a young quarterback who's played exactly 0 NFL snaps, so you, me, nobody knows what the hell he is or isn't going to be at this point. We could think or we could believe, but the reality is all of us, we don't know. You've got a defense that's trending in the wrong direction that just cut a Pro Bowl level cornerback for the fuck all of it to bring in the Red Rocket. And yet you guys want to praise the guy that drafted Mitchell Trubisky, has made all of these moves that have depleted draft pick capital, and sat there and signed Andy Dalton, and oh, by the way, hired the head coach you don't trust in Matt Nagy. Now, maybe this year shows a different trajectory for the Bears, and maybe this year shows some validation for Ryan Pace, and if it does at that point in time, then he deserves it. But right now, for now, you should be holding off on it because there's really no reason for it, honestly.